Hi friends, I hope you're doing well today. This spring break in 2015, I went on an ecotourism trip to Costa Rica through my university. The trip itself was organized by the Monteverde Institute, and today I'd like to share what I learned from the nonprofit The Bat Jungle about bats. So if you were anything like I was, you might not know very much about bats or have much of an opinion about them, and that's okay. For me, the closest I'd ever come to a bat was when one decided to wedge itself into my dorm room window and we had to call the building service worker to come and get it out. I also associated certain terms with bats, things like echolocation, nocturnal, caves, spooky, Batman. And while some of these things are true, there turns out to be a lot more about bats than just that. So, part 1, bat basics. First things first, what kind of animal do you associate with bats? If you say mice, most of the world would agree with you. In German, French, Latin, and Russian, all these words literally translate into something mice. Well, as it turns out, that's wrong. Bats are actually most closely related to primates. You can see this through a skeletal comparison between bat and human skeletons. For instance, the middle finger is the longest in both bats and humans, and we both also have opposable thumbs. The similarities to primates goes beyond just skeletal though. Bats generally live 20 to 40 years, and their nocturnal eyesight is about as good as our diurnal eyesight. The opposite is true as well, so while we can't see very well in the dark, bats can't see very well in the day. Coincidentally, the phrase blind as a bat is actually a truncated version of blind as a bat at high noon. So the next time you want to use this phrase, make sure you use the full version. Bats also reproduce fairly similarly to primates. Mother bats, for instance, will generally only have one baby bat per year because of how heavy the baby bat gets compared to the mother's weight, which is 1/3. Unfortunately, bats also have a really high death percentage, about 50%. A lot of baby bats actually die trying to learn how to fly. Incidentally, the ones who teach the baby bats how to fly are the father bats, so obviously there's room for some improvement here. As for social interactions, bats have a really complex kinship network. Mother bats, for instance, are known to give birth with the help with another bat, which is something like a midwife. Bats are also known to adopt orphan bats that they see. As for the communities they live in, bats generally live in colonies, and they do share information amongst themselves. One example my tour guide gave was how they couldn't put bat mist nets in the same place until 2 weeks later, because the bats would see them that first night, memorize where they were so they wouldn't fly into them, and then also tell all of their friends. So obviously, data collection would be really difficult if they put the bat mist nets in the same place. Last, bats will take care of injured members of their colony. They'll actually come back, regurgitate food for that injured bat, and then make sure that bat recovers safely. Funnily enough, if a bat is a jerk and decides not to help that injured bat with the food, that injured bat, once recovered, will remember who did not give them food and then refuse to give them food in turn when they get injured. It's kind of a golden rule for bats. Finally, like humans, bats have the resilience and the intelligence to adapt to almost every condition on Earth, as you can see on this map. In fact, bats make up 25% of all mammal species worldwide, more than any other mammal group, and in places like the rainforests of Costa Rica, here in the yellow area, bats make up 60% of the mammal diversity. So let's take a look at all the amazing different types of bats. There's the largest known bat, the giant golden-crowned flying fox bat in the Philippines, and it has a huge wingspan of 5.6 feet or 1.7 meters. Don't worry, it only eats fruit, which it uses sight and smell to locate. On the other end of the spectrum is the Kitti's hognose bat from Thailand and Burma, nicknamed the bumblebee bat. Its wingspan is just 6 inches or 15 centimeters, and it eats insects. There's also the fish-eating myotis in the Gulf of California, the nectar-eating Mexican long-tongued bat, the meat-eating ghost bat in Australia, which eats rodents, birds, bats, lizards, frogs, and snakes, as well as the infamous blood-eating vampire bat in Latin America, which is nowhere near Romania, so I'm not really sure how the whole Dracula thing started. Also, not because they have any special diet, but because they are devastatingly cute. Here are some Honduran white bats in Central America. They build little leaf tents by intelligently cutting material from between the leaf veins, which makes the leaf itself live longer before it dies. Also, the light filtering through the leaf colors their white fur green for camouflage. And then here are some less classically beautiful bats. The hammer-headed bat's moose-like head is one of my favorites. But what benefits do bats themselves bring to humans? Well, as it turns out, quite a lot of benefits. About 70% of all bats actually only exclusively eat insects, and considering that 85% of all insects are nocturnal, bats are a really important part in controlling insect populations, which may carry diseases transmittable to humans. Most insect-eating bats will consume 600 to 1,000 insects per hour. So in places like Austin, Texas, which is where the world's largest bat colony is, this translates to an amazing 200 tons of insects per night. And as the world continues to warm from climate change and insects get more and more territory to live in, bats are going to play an increasingly vital role in our survival. The majority of the rest of the bats eat fruit and nectar, which helps distribute fruit seeds, provide fertilizer for the plant, and also pollinates them. One such plant exclusively pollinated by the Mexican long-tongued bat is the blue agave in the pineapple family, which is used to make tequila. So if you like tequila, bats are important. There are two final misconceptions about bats that I like to clear up. The first is rabies. Although you hear a lot of scary stories about rabies, and on the CDC's website there's a whole section dedicated to bats in the rabies section, bats are actually only responsible for 10% of the human-transmitted rabies. In fact, the World Health Organization found in September 2014 that dogs are actually the #1 transmitter of rabies to humans worldwide. Pet vaccinations have decreased the risk in North America, so the Center for Disease Control reports that the vast majority of transmitters are actually raccoons, skunks, woodchucks, foxes, and coyotes. The second fact I like to clear up is makeup. So for many years, there was this rumor going around that bat poop, or bat guano, Spanish for poop, was actually found in mascara specifically, but in a lot of other makeup products as well. Well, as it turns out, Snopes.com, one of the most popular world's sleuthing websites, found that it's actually guanine that is in makeup material. So instead of bat poop, it's actually fish scales. So the more you know. Part 2, challenges facing bats. Like almost all other species on Earth, bats are really struggling in the Anthropocene, which is basically the era where human activities such as climate change, deforestation, as well as habitat fragmentation are really affecting all the animals. The last time that 90% of all animals went extinct, basically in the extinction period, was when the dinosaurs were around. So this is actually a really big deal and something that really needs to be addressed in today's world. As for an issue that affects bats specifically, there's the white nose syndrome, which is basically when a white fungus grows over a bat during winter hibernation. Scientists still don't really know what's going on, even though this was discovered in 2006, and this is almost a decade later. But this disease was first cited on the eastern coast of the United States. The fungus has already spread to the Midwest, and it doesn't seem to be slowing down. What people think is going on with the bats is that this fungus somehow interferes with their ability to store their winter fat, which is obviously very important for getting through the winter. Whatever the case may be, this is a really devastating disease for bats because once it reaches a bat colony, 80 to 90% of the population will die. So this is something that is really important right now. Something else that's a problem for bats is wind energy. As an environmental major, I often hear about bird strikes as being a problem for wind turbines, but it actually turns out it's a huge problem for bats as well. It's estimated that in the US and Canada alone, hundreds of thousands of bats are killed every single year from wind turbines. Again, scientists are still trying to figure out why this happens, but they think it's because of how bats' wings are a little bit weaker than birds' wings. So by the time they can pick up the wind turbine or they decide they want to get away from it, their wings can't escape the air vacuum that the wind turbine is creating, and then they get crushed to death or simply strike the turbine. Finally, it's really hard for bat populations to recover once all of these devastating things happen to them. We've already talked a little bit about this, of how the natural limits of reproduction is something that keeps bats from bolstering up their populations again. But there's also this problem that bats aren't really suited for captivity breeding. Getting several tons of fruit and nectar is usually pretty doable, but when you start talking about getting several tons of insects every single night for bats, well, that can be a little bit harder to do. Now, back to vampire bats. There's only 3 species of them, and they all live in Latin America. And they're also probably the few kinds of bats that are benefiting from us. So for them, their populations were usually kept in control because it's very hard to pursue a fast-moving deer or a fast-moving agouti in the forests. Well, when you take into account all the different livestock that humans have introduced, cows are very slow-moving, and they are usually in the same place all the time. So vampire bat populations have really swelled, and this is becoming a problem because if too many vampire bats feed on one single cow, that cow will get weak, maybe get sick, and then will die. So obviously this is something that livestock farmers really don't like. And going back to the climate change thing, if the world continues to warm like it is right now, vampire bats will be able to expand from the equator, go north, go south, and of course there are a ton more livestock here in North America, so that's definitely going to be a problem soon in the future as well. So part 3, how do we help bats? Well, first, I've been talking a lot about climate change, so we can work against climate change and make sure that we don't destroy as many habitats from human activities. Of course, this is a really general solution for a really general problem, and of course I'm not going to go into many of the nitty-gritties that you can do to help this planet because a lot of other videos have already covered this. Also, make sure not to disturb bats while in the daytime because, well, imagine if a giant animal was suddenly poking at you in the middle of the night. That'd be pretty scary, right? So the same goes for bats. Don't disturb them during the daytime. Second, we can start prioritizing bats as a charismatic species. A lot of people already care about tigers, pandas, the whole endangered species list. But bats are actually really, really important, and they're not just important to the environment, but they're also really important to humans specifically. So we need to educate other people, and we need to educate ourselves on the importance of bats. Third, in government, we can push for penalties for people who threaten or disturb bats. In the United Kingdom, for instance, a law was already passed in the early 2000s that fines people up to £5,000 and/or up to 6 months in prison for disturbing or threatening a bat. Fourth, we can start to consider bats in seemingly unexpected, ordinary situations. Going back to the wind turbine example, we can make sure to not site wind turbines in places where bats are known to migrate, and this can be done by working with nonprofit groups like the Bat Jungle in Costa Rica, obviously for Costa Rican problems. Finally, on a smaller scale, you can install a bat home on your property, and those installed along barn walls seem to do better than freestanding ones. Big box stores already have them by the birdhouses, and the cheapest ones start at just $10. And of course, you can build your own. Well, that's it for now. Let's make a positive difference together for bats. Thanks for watching. Bye!